Hey everybody, welcome to another Midweek Conversation as we talk about this past Sunday's message, follow-up readings, any questions that arose, anything like that. Conversation goes wherever it tends to go. We don't script these out, so we're just flying live and talking about the sermon. This past week you were preaching out of Psalm 48, looking at generational relationship and generational impact within the church. I've got some questions as follow-ups. Before I dive into those, any follow-up thoughts, anything that was left on the cutting room floor?
No, I think we can jump into your questions about it.
Okay. So let's see. First question, you're talking about, as so many of us have been blessed to have people in our lives who poured their faith into us, who taught us what it looked like to be a faithful part of the church and a faithful disciple of Christ and things like that. What about the ones who didn't? Right. What about the ones who they're a first generation Christian or, maybe they were raised in a quote unquote Christian house, but it was really kind of nominal and they're the first person to take it seriously. What advice would you have for those people who are maybe sitting there going, I don't have that adult or grandparent or, uncle or aunt in my life that I can look at and say, okay, I just need to follow their example. I'm 42, I'm 51, I'm 30, and I'm taking this seriously on my own for the first time.
Yeah. And to those first generation believers, that is a very beautiful thing, right? Because it's that reminder of the way that God works. Because even though the church is designed to be generational, that doesn't necessarily mean generations of the exact same families. God is always bringing new people in, or even some people are fading out of it. And it's beautiful in that way, right? And so it is incredible, but it is daunting. If you are someone who was not personally discipled or didn't have someone deeply pouring into them and sharing that excitement, it's daunting to try and just build that up.
Yeah, especially later in life, right?
Yeah, and so I think the advice that I would give would be pour into kind of the final point of the message, right? Of commit to knowing your faith well so that you are confident about it going into it. And then it would be to find someone who might be willing to disciple you on how to disciple someone, right? And so it will take some humility because, again, you're later in life. You feel like you are strong in your faith already, but maybe this is that area you don't know. But it's a good place to start. It's a good place to learn, to grab someone and say, I know that you have discipled people or you've been discipled by someone. How did you disciple them? How were you discipled by someone? So that you can learn as a first generational Christian and take it forward, right? Some of the people I've seen who have taught me, not that I wasn't discipled, but like being married, I wasn't necessarily prepared for the idea of like being head of the household. I knew about it, but then you get into it and you're like, okay, do we just, you go through the motions like reading together and feeling like you're ticking a box. And it's like, I don't know if I'm really discipling my wife. And so I started having to look into it and being like, how do I, and it was embarrassing at first because it's like, I feel like I should know how to do this, especially like feeling like I'm in a position of leadership and I'm like, I feel like I know how to disciple people, but maybe not on this level or in this style. And so, go looking for, be willing to learn how to help someone else learn so that you don't have to necessarily go back and say, well, because I didn't have someone who did this for me, I'm completely unable to do it at all,
Yeah, it'd be a great opportunity to start. And I would add to that, you talked about someone who is solid in their faith, but just needs help learning how to pass that on. And I would say, or for the person who is, first generation Christian. And so, maybe they've been a Christian for 20 years, but it's still a first generation thing. And they're realizing, they're listening to the message and they realize like, man, I wouldn't know how to disciple someone, but even if I knew how to disciple someone, it wouldn't matter because I don't understand things well enough to disciple anyone. You know what I mean? Like I'm still not where I need to be. And to that, I would say kind of similarly, okay, rather than finding someone to teach you how to disciple, find someone to just disciple you. There's nothing wrong with going to the church and saying like, hey, is there somebody who could disciple me? You know what I mean? Like regardless of age or anything like that, like I just want to learn. Is there somebody who could disciple me so that I would be prepared to disciple someone else on a more foundational level? kind of related to that, how would you encourage parents who are like, I did this. I showed my kid what it looked like to faithfully serve the Lord. We were diligent in making faith part of our household growing up, right? And they still have walked away from the church. They have still walked away from the faith. What would you say to those parents or grandparents as you're talking about that cross-generational impact?
I mean, I would encourage them that just because they've walked away from the church now doesn't necessarily mean they forever will. And your faithful testimony may be applicable to them in 20 years rather than in their teen years, for whatever reason God uses these things. Or we are not sovereign over salvation. And so even if we do pour into people, like it doesn't just have to be our children, it can be anyone. We can faithfully pour into anyone, and sometimes it just is not used how we, in our arrogance, want it to be used. We want that immediate thing. And so I would encourage them that, one, it could be that down the road your faithfulness really will become applicable in their lives, and they will look back on that, and it will be this beautiful advocacy for Christianity that it just wasn't, right out of high school or right out of college. Or you might just have to say, Lord, I give this to you. Maybe it'll be someone else's faithfulness, maybe it'll be someone else's, but you can still say, I was faithful to my biblical calling. I was faithful to God's calling, and now I'm giving it into his hands. Because if you look at Israel, there are a lot of times where an unfaithful generation produces an unfaithful generation, right? And we learn that. There are a lot of times where a faithful generation produces an unfaithful generation. And there are other times where an unfaithful generation produces a faithful generation. And so there is no guaranteed success in it, because we give it all to God and we allow him to use it however he sees fit.
At the end of the day, we can't let people off the hook for their personal responsibility. Right? Like, I don't care how good of a parent you were, you cannot choose for your child to respond. You cannot respond to conviction for your child. And so as hard as that may be, there definitely has to be that element of like, okay, at the end of the day, and I think of, in a much more trivial example, right? The coach who comes up with the great game plan, but is like, I can't play the game for you. Your parent can help you study, but they can't take the test for you. We call that cheating. And it doesn't work that way with salvation. It doesn't work that way with discipleship and following Christ. So at the end of the day, there has to be a recognition of that phrase. That's where I was thinking you were going to go with it, and hoping you were going to go with it, right? Like, at the end of the day, are you faithful to your calling and take heart in that?
Because like you said, we can't force it upon them, and if you are simply forcing it upon them, it will probably just wash off of them when they are out of reach from you. And so rather you can just be faithful, and then it can come back up.
So obviously, you're not a parent yet, but you've been a child. What were some of the things, if there are parents listening to this and they're like, okay, what can I do? Here's a kid who grew up and became a pastor. So whether or not your kid becomes a pastor or a missionary or anything like that, but clearly somebody who's taking their faith very seriously, what were some of the things your parents did with you or for you that really made a big impact on you?
I think that a lot of things that we did that impacted me most was, like, my parents were very faithful in getting us to things. I think it can be really tempting to turn family into an idol and sacrifice church at its feet, basically, where all of a sudden, like, yes, we're a good family. We go to church on Sundays. But if we've had a busy week and we want to sleep in together and have pancakes and stuff,
that's no big deal. Who cares?
It's no big deal. Oh, that Bible study falls on a Wednesday evening or whatever. But we haven't had like dinner as a family all week or whatever. Stuff like that. It becomes really easy to just trivialize being at church. And my parents, there were a lot of us, which is fun. They had 5 kids, and so it felt like when they did make the extra effort, it showed it as very valuable, because it was like, we are busy, and yet they're at this thing. We are busy, and yet they don't let us have a Sunday morning off. like as kids, we were always stubborn about not wanting to go to church, which really shows that even being raised in the church, you can be resistant for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd be stubborn about it, and it was never just all right, it doesn't matter. It was, no, you're coming, and if you're really going to have that bad of an attitude, then no, you're not coming, because you need to respect it.
I remember one time my parents pulled over. We were living in Milford, PA, and our house there was a big chunk, I don't know how many blocks you would actually call it, but there was a big chunk of houses, and then back at the end of that, there was like a road that went back through the woods, and we lived back off that road. So it's not like they don't hear a horror story of parents, and clearly I'm alive today and standing here, right?
Yeah.
And I was probably like a junior or senior in high school, and my brother was, a sophomore in high school, so we're not talking 10-year-olds.
Your parents will appreciate all this
prefacing. If my parents watch this, they'll appreciate the caveats. But one time my brother and I just had like a terrible attitude about church. We're just fighting on the way to church. And my dad, I don't remember if it was my dad or my mom driving, but they're talking to each other quietly, and we're just, being punks in the back.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the car just like screeches over to the side.
Yeah.
And whatever parent was driving, like screeches over, and the parent that like leaned back and like opened the minivan door and pushed it open was like, okay, get out.
Yeah.
And we're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And they're like, this is not the heart you bring to church. So you either change your heart real quick, or get out, and you can either wait here and we'll pick you up on the way home, or where we live, you're old enough to walk home, but we're not taking you to church with this attitude. So you've got 60 seconds to decide if you're going to pray the rest of the drive or if you're going to get out. We're counting. And we're like, are you serious? And they're like, yes. Like, okay, you have 50 seconds to decide, because we're not going to be late for church. And it was like that realization of like, oh, mom and dad are so serious about church that we're like, well, can you like drive us home? They're like, no, we're not going to be late. We told you, like, this matters to us. Like, so you're either walking or you're asking God to forgive you and give you a right attitude right now. Yeah. And it was like, oh, that was sobering.
Yeah.
I think of things that my parents did that you talk about, like kind of the holistic, right? The impact that God had. Like, my parents were so quick to involve us or inform us, like not necessarily involve us in the sense of like, hey kids, let's take a vote. But anytime we did something, my parents would add the testimony to it of, hey, we're doing this because of what God has done for us. You know what I mean? Like, so we'd whine about like, the one year, and we wound up having an incredible time, and it was so impactful. But like, we weren't thrilled to spend. And a lot of people, I'm going to guess you're going to hear this and be like, oh, that's a bit extreme. Yeah. We were not thrilled to spend Thanksgiving Day working in a soup kitchen for the homeless. Like, Thanksgiving Day is about sleeping in, eating a massive meal, watching football and falling asleep with football, so you can wake up and eat more food so you can fall asleep in front of the late football, right? Like, that's what Thanksgiving Day is about. Yeah. And all of a sudden it was like, no, Thanksgiving Day is going to be about like, hurry up and eat a quick light lunch so that we can get down to the soup kitchen and serve people. And it was like, why? Because of how good God has been to us. You know what I mean? Like, it was always coming back to, you talked about, I loved your point of, God has shown himself to us, right? So are you telling people how you've seen God? Like, my parents were so good about, this is how we've seen God. This is what he's done. This is who he is. So that's why we now respond in this way. So even growing up, it wasn't just behavior modification. Yeah. It was they were teaching to the heart behind why we do what we do. And, you could see it in the way they lived their lives. Yeah. And then they were taking the time to deliberately tell us, here's the why. Yeah. And that was meaningful.
Yeah. And I mean, that was a lot of what my parents would do too. It was a lot of, and we still make fun of my dad for this, because he didn't necessarily just do it about biblical stuff, but he did about everything. He would ask us questions constantly. And we would always make fun of him for it.
Did he pause movies? Like mute TV shows?
He would from time to time, yeah. And so he was very, like, and that's how he processes things. He processes through questions, but it led to us being forced, because he expected an answer too, yeah. But it led to us being forced to think things through. Your least favorite question would always be like, well, why are you doing that? Because, and then it'd be like, I don't know. Why do you use your time that way? I don't know.
He'd pause my mom and dad would pause movies and be like, okay, why shouldn't that character have done that? I I don't know. I'm just trying to watch the movie. No. We're going to talk about why that was a poor life choice, right? Like, okay, fine. Yeah. I think back in the Old Testament, when God's talking to the people of Israel through Moses, it's like, look, do not neglect these teachings. Talk about them when you wake, when you lie down, when you're on the road, when you're in your house, like when you're, and my parents took that to be, when you're just trying to watch Good Burger on a Friday night, like pause the movie and teach them about my truth.
Yeah. And I think a really big thing that even like I had kind of forgotten about, and then I was looking back on after becoming a pastor and being very deeply in the Word and stuff, looking back, I didn't get bedtime stories, obviously, when I was like a little kid and couldn't fully comprehend what they were anyway, but like they would read the Bible to me every night. And we had it, I'm probably imagining it being way larger than it was because I was a kid, but like we had this big Bible that sat on my nightstand and they would come in. And it was a very big deal for me that I enjoyed the Bible. And so I think it led to me never really having a huge apprehension about reading the Bible because it was very just natural.
This is what you do. This is part of your life. This is a great thing. So it's really cool for me, and I hope I don't get choked up because that just messes up with the video, audio, and stuff. But sitting on Violet's nightstand is a Bible. And when you open the page, it says, to Sammy from Mommy and Daddy, 1994. So it was like the Bible they got me when I was 4 and able to really start follow, like you said, right at a young age, you're not following it and stuff. And so every night reading the Bible that my parents read to me with Violet and seeing her get excited for it. And it's like, man, this is cool. Like this is cool. And there's different things to just instill a love of things and an appreciation of things. I've shared this before, and it's still a knee-jerk reaction today, and I can say this is now cool having been a child and now being a parent. When I hear sirens, I like if I'm in the car and I have music playing and I hear sirens, before I even realize what's happening, my hand is turning off the radio to pray for the people who need the sirens and the people in the sirens going to help. Why? Because prayer matters. And it's a knee-jerk reaction because my parents made sure the knee-jerk reaction was we go to the Lord in prayer. Not just to do it, not just behavior modification. If it was just behavior modification, I'd be like, well, I'm not going to pray for a stranger. I don't know them. And, but it's like, well, no, I care about them because God cares about them, and I believe prayer matters, right? And what's really cool for me is if I'm in the yard doing work or if we're in the car driving, sometimes before I even hear it, all of a sudden Violet will be like, Dad, like the other day she came over and I had just mowed. I went in, put the mower away, came back out with the blower to clear off the sidewalk, and I go to turn it on, and she comes over and she puts her hand on it. She's like, no, don't turn it on. We have to pray for the sirens. And I was like, what's that? Oh, okay, yeah, they're the sirens. All right, let's pray, right? There's a lot that parents can do to show their children, here is a life wholly dedicated to the Lord and His things.
And I think it all really comes from just never assuming that the home doesn't affect spirituality, never assuming that you're outside of an area, like you're not in a neutral zone.
And actually I would take it I'd say it even maybe a little more extreme, never forgetting that you as the parent are the primary discipler of the child. The church is not, and I loved when you said this, right, where you're like, oh, that's what we pay you for, youth pastor, and like, I can't do this on my own. And I'm not the first one in line. Like, you're the first one in line. Grandparents, what are you doing? Aunts, uncles, what are you doing? And it really is, we can't lose sight of the fact that this is the call on our lives. And then especially within the church, like, okay, maybe you don't have kids. Your kids are old and grown, right? Like, what are you doing for the youth of this church? What are you doing for the kids of this church? There's a lot more thoughts. Maybe we'll wind up doing like a sermon sidecar or something, but this is a fun conversation. And honestly, we could probably go for another 20 or 30 minutes without batting an eye.
Definitely.
If you have questions, if you have comments, we'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
See you.
Hey everyone, Pastor Sam, thanks so much for joining us on a midweek conversation. We hope it challenged you, encouraged you, kept this past Sunday's message at the front of our hearts and minds throughout the week. As always, if you have questions or comments you'd like us to discuss, please let us know. Otherwise, you can find more content like this here on our channel. Make sure you subscribe to stay up to date, and we'll see you next time.